Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're going to be taking a look at Swordbreaker for the Nintendo Switch. And I'll be honest, this game is interesting for a couple of reasons, so as always, it'll be up to you to decide if this is a game you want to get into or not. But starting off with the story, some pretty rough narration introduces us to the main character, Swordbreaker, as he spectates a pretty gruesome bar fight. And approaching the dying patron, obviously the loser of the bar fight, the Swordbreaker is given a mysterious map depicting an even more mysterious castle. And as is the sworn duty of every broke adventurer, he heads off post-haste to go and make his fortune. And it's with this opening scene asking us as to whether we want to enter the castle through the main gate or through the open window that we really start the gameplay. Swordbreaker itself really does play out kind of like it's described on the eShop as a bit of a tribute to those old school classic choose-your-own adventure books. The game has over 300 beautifully crafted scenes, and taking out all the death scenes and repeated imagery for fight scenes leaves us with over 100 different decisions to make to get us from that front gate all the way to the game's final pages. And as you navigate through this mysterious castle and choose whether to hide or intervene to save someone or off someone just for your own personal benefit, you'll be making your way to the end of the game, of course, but also building the profile of the character you're playing as. There are dozens of different scenarios within Swordbreaker and hundreds of decisions to be made, but there's also a karma system, meaning that of the game's multiple endings, you can also finish the game on the karma spectrum anywhere from hero to murderer. And yes, that karma system may actually aid you in defining which of these multiple endings you're going to get. So whether you choose to have Swordbreaker become a hero, a rogue, or a villain is completely up to you. As I mentioned previously, though, there are a lot of decisions to make while playing through Swordbreaker, and while some might seem as benign as just choosing a door, any outcome from any decision you make could be your last. Thankfully, though, unlike some of the more text-based RPGs of the past, we don't die and start the game over as soon as we make a misstep. As it turns out, the benevolent creators of Swordbreaker gave us 3 hearts to make 3 mistakes to get us all the way to the end of the game. But regardless of whether you make it to the game bruised and battered on your last heart or completely unscathed all the way to that final confrontation, you'll have to navigate through dozens of scenarios, ranging from the D&D style mazes filled with mindless rats to confrontations with minotaurs, to chance encounters with intergalactic mercenaries, and even a few random quests, such as the one from the castle's humble blacksmith as he asks you to help him mine uranium to create nuclear warheads. Yeah, Castle Blacksmith, nuclear warheads, intergalactic war, nuclear physics. Yeah. But despite all of the millions of possibilities for endings that a story that incorporates minotaurs and space aliens and nuclear physics could possibly have, as all the branching storylines reach about the midpoint of the game, they all start to converge back together into a common root. This does, of course, mean that no matter how you've played the game, you'll eventually start stumbling over some common paths, and the entirety of the game is limited to a very finite number of the multiple endings. Moving away from game mechanics and into game visuals and audio, though, as I've already mentioned, the game's visuals are pretty darn good for what they are. They're well-rendered and high-quality images that do a really great job at portraying the exact scenario you're in with all the possible decisions to make. The game's audio, though, while pretty darn high quality, isn't really very diverse. So the longer you do play the game, the more likely it is that you'll start to recognize you're just hearing the same soundtrack on repeat. Getting into some of the more negative aspects of the game, though, it's actually not likely that you will pay much attention to the music because you won't be playing the game for very long. Beating the game about 4 or 5 times trying to get all of the unlockable endings, as well as diving into as many avenues of the storyline as I could, only took me about 45 minutes. My first play through the game, though, when I was actually reading all of the text and trying to make the right decisions, and admittedly I died a few times, only took me about half an hour, meaning I played through the game about 4 or 5 more times in the span of about 15 minutes. This is pretty good, though, if you are a completionist player, because you don't really have to re-engage with the story and you can memorize all of the decision trees pretty quickly. But for anyone else, there might not be as big of a motivation to actually go back through and keep playing the game. The voice acting, as I mentioned, is a little bit gruff, but that's only really limited to that opening scene. And other than that, while it's really not a negative, the story was just really disjointed. I mean, you're playing through a medieval scenario and you encounter succubi and space aliens, and there's this hint at some intergalactic war. It just seems so random. But again, that doesn't really make it a bad game concept, it just kind of throws the player for a bit of a loop. Overall, though, the game was pretty fun. I gotta say, it didn't last very long, and I'm kind of a little bit more confused after having played the game than I was when I started, but maybe for certain players it's actually going to be a good experience. And while I probably wouldn't recommend it super highly if you have anything else on your playlist, if it did ever drop to that sub $1 range, it might be worth it for the right player. But anyway, that does about wrap up the review of Swordbreaker now on the Nintendo Switch, so if you enjoyed the review, or especially if you found it helpful, feel free to throw me a like or a comment to show your support. And don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. There are new and unique indies coming out literally every single day. And whether it's an easy hard pass or an absolute unforgettable gem, you're gonna find out about it right here. But anyway, this has been The Budget Gamer, so as always, thanks for watching.